Mr. President, with this distinguished record and recommendations that we have received, we have an excellent nominee to serve on the Court of Appeals. I urge my colleagues to vote for his confirmation. And with that, Mr. President, I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, it is my privilege, it is my honor to support Goodwin Liu, a Californian and a brilliant Californian who has been nominated by the President to the United States Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And what a fine nomination this is. And I want to thank the President for his belief in Goodwin and his, I think, amazing perception that this is a young man, and he's young. He's about 40. This is a young man who is just exceptional, is a perfect example of the American dream, and someone who has worked so hard to put him into this position where he was nominated for this great honor. I want to show folks a picture of Goodwin. He's a very, very special and talented person. And he's had a long struggle with this nomination, which we will talk about. I also want to thank, of course, Chairman Leahy for working hard to bring this nomination to the Senate floor, and Senator Feinstein, my colleague, for her hard work in the committee and her leadership in helping to shepherd this nomination in the Senate. This vote is not only historic, because Goodwin will make history if he gets this vote. This vote is long overdue. First, let me talk about why it's historic. It's historic because if we get the 51 votes that we need today, Professor Liu will be one of only 2 Asian Americans currently serving as a federal appellate judge in the United States. There is currently only 1 Asian American among the 160 active judges on the Federal Court of Appeals, and there is no active Asian American judge on the Ninth Circuit, which has jurisdiction over an area that is home to more than 40% of our nation's Asian American population. Let me repeat that. There is no active Asian American judge on the Ninth Circuit, which has jurisdiction over an area that is home to more than 40% of our nation's Asian American population. Now, the beauty of our great nation, one of the beauties, is our great diversity. America is great because we are representative of so many faiths and so many ethnic backgrounds. And we know that all of our institutions, whether it's right here in the Senate or anywhere, all of our institutions do better when they have a diversity of views and diversity around them. And clearly, when someone as brilliant as Goodwin gets this nomination, we should be so proud in this body. We should be joining hands over party lines. We should be pleased that our court would have such a brilliant member. Now, Professor Liu was originally nominated in February 2010 for a judicial emergency seat, one that's been vacant since January 2009. So we've had a judicial emergency, and yet we've had a hard time getting this vote to the floor. Now, Chief Justice Roberts called on senators not to play politics with our nominees. He warned that delays in filling vacancies has created acute difficulties in some judicial districts. That's a quote. Undoubtedly, the Ninth Circuit certainly is one of the jurisdictions the Chief Justice referred to, because the Ninth Circuit is the nation's largest and busiest appellate court in the country, accounting for over 20% of all new appellate cases in the country, according to court statistics. Now, I sat and I heard Senator Cardin, I thought, just did a beautiful job of laying out why he's supporting Goodwin Liu, but I also heard some other comments that didn't connect to Goodwin Liu. I heard comments that just didn't fit what Goodwin Liu has said about his role as a judge. And so I wanted to put up a couple of the quotes directly from Professor Liu and what he said about his role as a judge. He said, "I think the role of the judge is to be an impartial, objective, and neutral arbiter of specific cases and controversies that come before him or her. And the way that that process works is through absolute fidelity to the applicable precedents and the language of the laws, statutes, regulations that are at issue in the case." Another statement by Professor Liu I wanted to share with you. He said, "If I were fortunate enough to be confirmed in this process, it would not be my role to bring any particular theory of constitutional interpretation to the job of an intermediate appellate judge. The duty of a circuit judge is to faithfully follow the Supreme Court's instructions on matters of constitutional interpretation, not any particular theory. And so that is exactly what I would do, is I would apply the applicable precedents to the facts of each case." Couldn't be clearer. So if you hear any colleague of mine saying something else about how Professor Liu views the role of a judge in this particular appellate area, just refer them to these quotes. "Professor Liu has sat before the Senate Judiciary Committee twice for more than 5 hours. 5 hours! Answering any and all questions posed to him during the hearings. He has also answered numerous written questions from committee members. He has been voted out of the Judiciary Committee 3 times. And I just ask the American people, as they tune into this debate, and they may not be familiar with, the confirmation process, if they think it is fair for someone like Professor Liu, and we'll put his picture back up, so we personalize this young man, this husband, this father, this teacher, to have to sit for all those hours and then finally be brought to the floor after the 3rd time he's voted it. That's why I really praise Senator Leahy for doing this again. But sometimes there are reasons that you go back and back and back. There are reasons of fairness and justice, and because we don't want to miss an opportunity to put someone like Goodwin, Professor Liu, on the bench. Now, I will tell you, there have been 12 months of attacks on Goodwin Liu. Misrepresentations, unfounded distortions of his record, and I want the American people to know this. You know, politics is tough, and I could tell you, running 4 times for the Senate, it's tough, it's brutal, it's ugly, but there is no reason to turn that venom on a nominee like this. And it is offensive to me. Through it all, Professor Liu could have said, you know what, I can't take this, I don't need this, my kids don't need this, my family doesn't need this. But he showed courage and character and dignity. I was so pleased when President Obama nominated Goodwin Liu to serve on the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, because Goodwin Liu is considered one of the brightest legal scholars, not just in California, but in the nation. He is a respected authority on constitutional law. At UC Berkeley's Bolt Hall School of Law, where he's an associate dean and a professor, he is admired widely for his writings and his devotion to his students. To Professor Liu, if you are watching these proceedings, I'm proud of you. And to Professor Liu's wife, Anne, and his 2 small children, Violet and Emmett, I say thank you for your patience and your unyielding support, and you should be so proud of your dad. And let me tell you a little bit about Goodwin Liu's background. He was born in Augusta, Georgia, the son of Taiwanese immigrants who came to this country to practice medicine in underserved areas. In 1977, they moved to Sacramento, where his parents were primary care physicians for over 20 years. In Goodwin, his parents instilled both perseverance and a strong work ethic, even leaving math problems on the kitchen table every day of the summer to supplement his schoolwork. As a high school student, he pulled all-nighters studying the dictionary to expand his vocabulary and raise his SAT scores. His hard work paid off, propelling him to Stanford University, where he graduated Phi Beta Kappa, and to Oxford University, where he was a Rhodes Scholar. So I say to my colleagues on the other side who often say it ought to be, you know, the results of your life that count, it ought to be your record that counts, it ought to be your qualifications that count. Stanford University, Phi Beta Kappa. Oxford University, Rhodes Scholar. Liu's experience at Stanford and Oxford in student government as a summer school teacher for low-income youth, co-directing a K-12 youth education conference, and studying philosophy encouraged him to pursue the law and public service. In fact, Liu spent the next 2 years at the Corporation for National Service, helping to launch the groundbreaking AmeriCorps program. He led the agency's effort to build community service programs at colleges and universities across the country. He traveled to over 30 states to encourage service among students. The spark of public service and the law clearly ignited, and Liu then went on to attend Yale Law School. His stellar record of achievement continued at Yale, where Liu, along with a classmate, won the prize for the best team argument in the moot court competition. Several of his papers won awards, and he earned prestigious clerkships on both the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court. What more does anyone want from a nominee? I can't even imagine, frankly, even matching this. In between the clerkships, Liu again chose public service, working at the U.S. Department of Education, helping to implement a congressional appropriation to help turn around low-performing schools. Former South Carolina Governor Richard Riley, who was Secretary of Education at the time, called Liu a go-to person, his words, for important projects and complex issues because of Liu's ability to see the big picture while also mastering the details of legal and policy problems. Now, what else do you want in a judge? An ability to see the big picture while also mastering the details of legal and policy problems. That's a quote from former South Carolina Governor Richard Riley. After completing his Supreme Court clerkship, Liu joined the litigation practice at O'Melveny and Myers, working on a wide range of business matters. So there he was then in private practice. So you have a person who has, worked in government, in private practice, in education. He earned high praise from his peers, including Walter Dellinger, chair of O'Melveny's appellate practice, who said, quote, "Liu is widely respected in law practice for his superb legal ability, his sound judgment, and his warm collegiality," unquote. Then Liu joined the faculty at UC Berkeley's Bolt Hall in 2003, and he quickly established himself as an outstanding teacher as well as a constitutional law and education law and policy expert. Think about this in a young life. This is a young life. All these experiences, including raising a family. In the classroom, Liu is popular. He's well regarded. His introductory constitutional law course is consistently one of the most oversubscribed at Bolt. They want to hear him. They want to be in his presence to understand how the Constitution works and why this country is so special. In 2009, Liu received UC Berkeley's Distinguished Teaching Award, the university's most prestigious teaching excellence award. He was selected by that year's graduating class to be commencement speaker. Students often remark on Liu's efforts to illustrate the impact of the law on everyday life. As anyone who's taken his con law class knows, to demonstrate the principle, Liu uses a wedding photo that shows him and his new bride, Anne O'Leary, the Irish-American daughter of a social worker and union leader from Orono, Maine. The two married in Virginia, a state that had restricted interracial marriage until the Supreme Court invalidated the provision in the landmark 1967 case Loving versus Virginia. Berkeley Law School Dean Christopher Edley describes Professor Liu this way: "Goodwin Liu is an outstanding teacher, a brilliant scholar, and an exceptional public servant," unquote. Professor Liu is widely respected and has tremendous support across the legal spectrum and from both sides of the political aisle. I want to read you what Ken Starr has said about Goodwin Liu. Remember Ken Starr, the former Whitewater prosecutor. This is what he says. In our view, and he wrote this with Professor Amar in an op-ed piece that ran In our view, the traits that should weigh most heavily in the evaluation of an extraordinarily qualified nominee such as Goodwin are professional integrity and the ability to discharge faithfully an abiding duty to follow the law. Because Goodwin possesses those qualities to the highest degree, we are confident that he will serve on the Court of Appeals not only fairly and competently, but with great distinction. We support and we urge his speedy confirmation. I want to point out to my Republican friends, Ken Starr is one of your heroes. Come on. Listen to what he says about Goodwin Liu. And don't come to the floor and say things about Goodwin that aren't so. Please, come to your senses about Goodwin Liu. And let's see, there's another supporter I wanted to talk about, too. And this is former Bush administration counsel Richard Painter. I've done my share of vetting and fighting the confirmation wars. I didn't know much about Liu before his nomination, but I became intrigued by the attention the nomination generated, and I wondered if his Republican critics were deploying the same tactics Democrats use to attack Republican nominees. They were. If anything, the attacks on Liu have been even more unfair. Based on my own review of his record, I believe it's not a close question that Liu is an outstanding nominee whose views fall well within the legal mainstream. That conclusion is shared by leading conservatives who are familiar with Liu's record, and that's Richard Painter, former Bush administration counsel. Let's put his picture back up. We even have a quote from Clint Bolick of the Goldwater Institute, one of the most conservative institutes. They endorsed Liu. This is what they said. Because of his fresh, independent thinking and his intellectual honesty, as well as his scholarly credentials and experience to serve with distinction on this important court. If that's not enough for my Republican friends, I got some more. I've got former Republican Congressman Bob Barr. He offered praise of Professor Liu's commitment to the Constitution and to a fair criminal justice system. Barr also noted that Liu's views are shared by many scholars, lawyers, public officials from across the spectrum. And Tom Campbell of California, a former Republican congressman, someone who actually attempted to run against me a couple of times for the Senate, he wrote, Goodwin will bring scholarly distinction and a strong reputation for integrity, fair-mindedness, and collegiality to the Ninth Circuit. Reflecting on Liu's many years of work in serving the public interest, Campbell said, I'm not surprised that Liu has again been called to public service. Yes, he's been called to public service. He's been nominated, but he won't be able to continue his extraordinary work unless we get 51 votes here. And I know there's some letter that's circulating that attacks Goodwin Liu again. And I hope that my colleagues will read not what I'm saying, but what leading Republicans are saying about how talented Goodwin Liu is. Every single thing the man has done has turned to gold. Every single thing he's done. Everything he does, he's best at. He's best at. Why would we lose this opportunity for the American people to have him serve them in this important capacity? I ask that rhetorically. I can't imagine why anyone would vote no. Now, here's another one. Professor Liu has even drawn praise from Brian Jones, who served as the general counsel at the Department of Education after Liu's tenure there. And this Brian Jones, who was the general counsel at the Department of Education under George Bush, this is what he said. During 01 and 02, and even after he became a law professor in 03, Goodwin volunteered his time and expertise on several occasions to help me and my staff sort through legal issues that he worked on during the previous administration. In those interactions, Goodwin's efforts were models of bipartisan cooperation. He brought useful knowledge and careful lawyerly perspectives that helped our administration achieve its goals. But I am convinced, based on his record and my own experiences with him, that he is a thoughtful, fair-minded, and well-qualified to be an appellate judge. I don't know why the Republicans filibustered this nomination. I don't know why they filibustered this. I don't understand it. Let's look at some of the organizations that back Goodwin. Of course, in the Asian American community, they are so proud, as they should be, as I am, because Goodwin's a Californian by choice. In an op-ed published today, former Secretary Norm Mineta, the first Asian Pacific American member of the President's cabinet, and that's the Bush cabinet, Mineta. He wrote that Professor Liu is an extremely well-qualified nominee who has the intellectual capacity, experience, temperament, and integrity to be an excellent jurist. And Mineta went on to warn, quote, if Liu is not confirmed, Asian Pacific Americans may be left with the impression that there continues to be a glass ceiling blocking Asian Pacific Americans from top-level leadership positions regardless of their qualifications. Let me say that again. Norm Mineta, anyone who knows him, knows what a wonderful human being he is. George W. Bush chose Norm Mineta, Norm's a Democrat, to be the Secretary of Transportation. And Norm Mineta says, because Professor Liu is so qualified, and I've gone through it, and has so much intellectual capacity, such great experience, such great temperament, and so much integrity, that he warns, quote, if Liu is not confirmed, Asian Pacific Americans may be left with the impression that there continues to be a glass ceiling blocking Asian Pacific Americans from top-level leadership positions regardless of their qualifications, unquote. We have a quote from the Committee of 100, a national nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization that addresses Sino-U.S. relations affecting the Chinese-American community. They wrote, Liu's ascension to the bench would signal that talented people of all backgrounds are integral to our justice system. You know, what we do here matters. It matters who we send to these important positions. We have someone here who will break down barriers, but you know what? That wouldn't be enough. He's got to be great. He's got to be outstanding. And he's all those things. And yet, we're very nervous about getting 51 votes. We're very nervous that politics is being played. We don't know what's going to happen at the end of the day. That's why I'm taking this time. I'm taking this time because I want my colleagues to know if they cast an aye vote, it should bring a smile to their face. They should feel good in their heart and their mind because they'd be doing the right thing. 25 prominent Asian Pacific Americans who serve as general counsel to Fortune 1000 companies and other large companies wrote, Professor Liu has earned praise from conservatives. His intellect and qualifications are beyond dispute. Indeed, Professor Liu has been rated unanimously well qualified by the American Bar Association. And they go on, it is worth noting that Professor Liu would become the only Asian Pacific American active appellate court judge in the Ninth Circuit and only the second Asian Pacific American active appellate court judge nationwide. And given the large number of Asian Pacific Americans in California, Hawaii, and other states covered by the Ninth Circuit, and I said, Madam President, before that I think it's 40% of Asian Americans live in this particular area that the court covers. We know that the lack of an Asian Pacific American judge in this circuit is striking. And they continue, we feel Professor Liu would serve our country well and with distinction. Professor Liu has drawn law enforcement support, including the California Correctional Peace Officers Association, the National Asian Peace Officers Association, which noted that Professor Liu has earned the respect of its members and the large audience of the law enforcement community. David Lum, the president of National Asian Peace Officers Association, went on to compliment Liu as, quote, a person of integrity, dedication, passion, enthusiasm, and law and order. Liu has received support from the business community, including from the prominent business executives with whom Liu served on the Stanford University Board of Trustees with. In a letter of support, Liu's fellow trustees wrote the following. Across a wide range of complex issues, Goodwin routinely asks thoughtful and incisive questions. He is good at thinking independently and zeroing in on important issues that need attention. Even in a room full of highly accomplished leaders, Goodwin is impressive, he's insightful, constructive, and he's a good listener. He possesses a remarkably even temperament. His demeanor is unfailingly respectful and open-minded, never dogmatic or inflexible. Given these qualities, it was no surprise that he was asked to chair the board's Special Committee on Investment Responsibility after serving just 1 year of his 5-year term. Again and again, there's a thread running through this man's life at 40. That's how old he is, 40. Is that right? That's right. 40 years old. Everything this man has done. This young man has been unbelievably, I want to say, unimaginable at his age that he has done all he has done. His strengths are what we expect in a judge. Objectivity, independence, collegiality. This is what the Stanford trustees say. Respect for differing views, sound judgment. Goodwin possesses these qualities on top of the brilliant legal acumen that's well established by his professional record and the judgment of those most familiar with his scholarly work. I'll tell you, it goes on and on. The president of Stanford University, along with 2 presidents emeritus, wrote to endorse Liu's nomination. They said he's epitomized the goal of Stanford founders, which was to promote the public welfare by exercising an influence on behalf of humanity and on behalf of civilization, teaching the blessings of liberty regulated by law with inculcating reverence for the great principles of government as derived from the inalienable rights of man to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This eloquence that is coming out of people's lips about Goodwin. Honestly, I've stood here before you many times, Madam President, and I've spoken in behalf of many nominees. I, honest to God, don't think I've ever had a situation where the eloquence and the passion of the supporters has come through as it has here for this young man. He's a blessing, honestly. And I feel at this moment we need to back him, all of us, and bring this country together around someone who epitomizes the American dream. I want to speak about, as I wind down, newspapers across the country who have weighed in to support Liu's nomination. The Washington Post remarked, Mr. Liu has sterling credentials that earned him the highest rating from the Bar Association. No allegations of impropriety to disqualify him from serving. The brilliant professor, they call him, who just turned 40 in October, testified he would not allow his academic musings to interfere with the duties of a lower court judge to follow precedent. And they write he should be confirmed and given the opportunity to demonstrate that he can do that. I was going to ask unanimous consent because I know Senator Tester's been waiting here for 40 minutes. Do you need about 5 or 7 minutes in morning business? Then I would ask that he be able to do that 5 to 7 minutes in morning business before we get to Senator Grassley. Is that acceptable? I'm almost done.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
So I'm closing in the next 2 minutes. The Sacramento Bee noted that Liu would add luster to any court, and the Los Angeles Times joined the New York Times in endorsing his confirmation. So we've heard from Professor Liu when I opened, and I think I'm going to close by saying this. When we ask people in this country to give back to this nation, and they step up to the plate, and they want to give their talent to this nation, and they are supremely qualified, and they bring with them mainstream views, mainstream endorsements, bipartisan endorsements from the progressive community to Kenneth Starr. For goodness sakes, give this man an up or down vote. And don't say that you believe that judges deserve an up or down vote when you're in the majority and suddenly now say, well, they don't deserve it now. So I hope we'll see the 60 votes for cloture and then the 51 votes for confirmation. And I'm just privileged to have had this opportunity to share the story of Professor Goodwin Liu with my colleagues. Thank you. I yield the floor, and I yield it to Senator Tester.
Madam President.
The senator from Montana.
I think this is appropriate. I'd ask Dan's consent to be as if in morning business.
Without objection.
And I want to thank Senator Boxer and Senator Grassley for their generosity. I'm not here to talk about Goodwin Liu. I'm going to talk about debit interchange. In a matter of weeks, the government is planning to price fix debit card swipe fees below the cost of doing business. They're going to price fix debit card swipe fees below the cost of doing business. On the surface, this plan might make sense. But peel back the layers, and you'll see why there's a whole bunch of folks out there on both sides of the aisle that are raising a flag. Now, I'm not asking to repeal the rules or even change them. I'm asking that we take a closer look so that we can get the information to understand the impacts, both intended and unintended. You know, I've listened to the feedback my colleagues have shared on this issue. I've heard their concerns. And while it is important to stop and examine the impact of limiting debit card swipe fees, some have said that 2 years is simply too long. I'm willing to adjust my legislation to address those concerns. So Senator Corker and I have decided to shorten the time frame from 24 months to 15 months. Now, here's how the 15 months are going to be used. 15 months will provide the agencies with 6 months for a study, and they will provide the Federal Reserve 6 months to rewrite the rules using that study. And it will allow 3 months to implement the final rules. 15 months is the bare minimum to get this study right, and we want to get it right. For me, stopping and studying the unintended consequences of government price fixing has everything to do with access to capital for small businesses and consumers in rural America. Make no mistake, the big banks are going to do fine no matter what. That's why I oppose to bailing them out. But, Madam President, all of Montana is rural. And all but 2 banks in my entire state are considered small community banks and will be affected by this debit interchange price-fixing rule. All of Montana's credit unions will be affected as well. They will feel the pinch, and they will lose because the government is going to set a price for doing business that doesn't cover their costs. Let me say it again. The federal government is going to tell these folks what price to set on interchange rates, and it will not be enough for the little guys to be able to compete in the marketplace. Let me ask this. How would a big box retailer react if we set the price of T-shirts? If we set the price of T-shirts, what it costs to make, ship, and market them, you can bet the retailers would be up in arms, and rightfully so, about the government setting prices and telling them how to run their business. Some have suggested that the only way to have a competitive marketplace is by capping rates. That kind of reason doesn't make sense to a farmer like me. When you slant the playing field against small banks, they can't compete with the big guys. And if they go under, the business and consumers that rely on them are left hanging. That, Madam President, is why a populist farmer from rural America is on the side of common sense in this debate, and I'm on the side of Montana small businesses and consumers. Last Thursday, I asked Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke about the impact of government price fixing as it applies to rural America. He's not only the major regulator who has raised serious questions about whether the supposed exemption will work for small banks. He's not the only one. Last week, Chairman Bernanke said, quote, it could result in some smaller banks being less profitable and even failing. Let me repeat that. In the words of Chairman Bernanke, the small banks in Montana and across America could fail under this planned rule. And what does it mean if small banks fail? It means more consolidation in the banking industry. Now, how in the world is that good for consumers? How is it better for a small business in Glendive, Montana, to have to ask a bank headquartered on Wall Street for a loan instead of going to the bank on Main Street? Are big banks going to provide the same level of service as community banks? I think not. Will they be able to evaluate the prospects of small businesses by only looking at data without understanding the communities that they serve? While big banks create strong relationships with people in rural America, will they do that? How about those folks who are looking to start a small business? We know that credit unions are one of the few financial institutions to ever consider going into Indian country to help bring investment to some of the most impoverished areas in this country. Do you think that if these small folks go under, there will be anyone else willing to lend on reservations? No way. No way. During last week's hearing, FDIC Chairwoman Sheila Bair said that this new rule is, quote, going to reduce revenues at a number of smaller banks, and they will have to pass that on to their customers in terms of higher fees. Rural America, especially in this fragile economy, cannot afford that, Madam President. Today I want to share a few businesses in Montana that are opposed to this government price fixing. Their stories are not uncommon. They're quite ordinary. Heard from a woman by the name of Doris Rocheleau. She runs Doris's Daycare in Great Falls, Montana. She's been doing business for nearly 30 years with a community bank. She tells me that she's struggling to make ends meet, as many small businesses are, and paying more in monthly checking would hurt her very, very much. Also in Great Falls, there's a small business owner named Mark Voiles. Mark owns Why Not Trucking. His reasons for supporting my amendment to stop and study the government limit is because, and I quote, doesn't want to pay more fees of his money in his bank. Cabela's a large retailer, a popular sporting goods store in Billings, Montana. Cabela's is worried of the Durbin Amendment because they offer their customers a rewards credit card. They have real concerns with government price controls and what they will mean for their ability to meet the needs of their customers. Bottom line is this. Allowing the government to price fix debit card swipe fees is a slippery slope. Maybe that's why my amendment is to stop and study the impacts of this proposed rule. It has broad bipartisan support from folks like the National Education Association or Americans for Tax Reform, different sides of the economic equation. And then there are nonprofit organizations like Rural Dynamics in Montana. Rural Dynamics serves the entire state of Montana, thousands of folks every year. Their mission to help individual people and families achieve economic independence, to make sure that folks can earn and keep and grow their assets to reach economic independence. Rural Dynamics is a well-respected organization. Many of their strategies involve helping Montanans manage their assets and save for their future, enabling them access to banking services. And anything that would result in undue higher fees would take their mission backwards. Rural Dynamics says simply we want to understand the long-term risk associated with limiting debit card swipe fees, how it will impact rural America, how it will affect economic independence. Just as convincing as small businesses in my state are the administration experts who have been tasked with trying to make this rule on debit interchange work. Chairman Bernanke just last week said he's still not sure whether the small issuer exemption would work, saying, I quote, there are market forces that would work against this exemption. Sheila Bair, chairwoman of the FDIC, raised similar concerns about the workability of the small issuer exemption. So has Chairwoman Debbie Matz of the National Credit Union Administration. So has the Conference of State Banking Supervisors. So has the National Association of State Credit Union Supervisors. This represents all of the regulators of the small financial institutions at the state and national level. Every one of them. These are the folks that are tasked with keeping our community banks and credit unions vibrant and strong, ensuring these institutions are well capitalized and making sound loans. And all of them, let me say again, all of them have raised concerns about the impact of this rule on small financial institutions that they supervise. These regulators are not convinced that these rules are going to be able to work in the way that they were intended. My friends on the other side of this debate continue to attack these folks. They've said they're shills for the big banks and they don't understand market forces and they don't understand small institutions. This couldn't be further from the truth. And no one has been able to explain to me why studying this issue to make sure that these rules do what they say they're supposed to do is a bad idea. To stop, to study, that's what the bipartisan bill that I'm sponsoring does, Madam President. To stop and study the unintended consequences for rural America and this country as a whole. If this rule goes into effect, the consumers and businesses who rely on community banks and credit unions, oh yeah, they're going to pay the price. And we can bet that many retailers won't be eager to pass a few pennies they save down to you. Yet Doris Rochelou's banking fees will go up. Mark Voiles will have to pay more to keep his money in his bank. The folks at Cabela's will be asking what's next, and will it hurt their loyal customers? And thousands of Montanans who rely on rural dynamics will have more hurdles to jump over to reach economic independence. Madam President, these stories hit home. They're the stories I tell when someone asks why would a populist farmer be against a government telling the small banks that drive our economy how to do business. I'm not asking to repeal this provision, far from it, Madam President. I'm asking us to do our homework in this body to make sure we understand exactly what it means for Montana and all of America. With that, I yield the floor, and I want to express my thanks to the good senator from Iowa one more time. Madam President, I yield the floor.
The senator from Iowa.
Thank you, Madam President. I come to the floor to speak on the nomination that's now before the Senate, the nomination of Goodwin Liu to be Circuit Judge, Ninth Circuit. I've said many times over the past 2 weeks, and maybe even for a longer period of time than 2 weeks, by any fair measure, we're moving judicial nominees at a very brisk pace. This month alone, we confirmed 7 judges in just 10 days. In the short time that we have been in session this year, we've confirmed 24 judges. That's a rate almost of 1 judge every other day. This year, the committee has favorably reported 51% of President Obama's nominees. Yet it seems that the more we work with the majority on filling vacancies, the more complaints that we hear. Furthermore, as we work together to confirm consensus nominees, we're met with the majority's insistence that we turn to controversial nominees like the one before us today, Goodwin Liu, because this seems to be the most controversial of the President Obama nominees that we've had to this point. I have pledged, and indeed I've demonstrated, cooperation in moving forward on consensus nominations. There is no doubt that Mr. Liu does not fall into that category of being a consensus nominee. My objections to this nominee can be summarized in 5 areas of concern: his controversial writings and speeches, an activist judicial philosophy, his lack of judicial temperament, his troublesome testimony, and lack of candor before the committee, and 5, his limited experience. Mr. Liu describes his writings as critical, inventive, and provocative, and that's really what they are. He states that he is simply a commentator, and his role is merely to poke, prod, and critique. The problem I have with this is that his legal scholarship goes well beyond simple commentary. The nominee argues that the 14th Amendment creates a constitutional right to some minimum level of public welfare benefits. That's a real reach. He has said that, quote, "The duty of government cannot be reduced to simply providing the basic necessities of life. The main pillars of the agenda would include expanded health insurance, child care, transportation subsidies, job training, and robust earned income tax credit." There's no doubt that those may be policy issues Congress ought to deal with, but it's a real stretch to say that they're a constitutionally protected right. Mr. Liu is a strong proponent of affirmative action and the constitutionality of affirmative action. Celebrating the Supreme Court's decision in Grutter versus Bollinger, he said, quote, "Achieving racial diversity throughout our leading educational institutions is not merely constitutionally permissible, but morally required." He believes ban on gay marriages are unconstitutional. The nominee was one of several law professors who filed a brief with the California Supreme Court in a suit seeking to have the California's same-sex marriage prohibition declared unconstitutional. These statements, just a sample of his works, are not merely scholarly reflection on the state of law. Instead, they're a prescription for change, big change. He stated following President Obama's election in an interview with NPR's Weekend Edition, quote, "Whereas I think in the last 7 or 8 years we had mostly been playing defense in the sense of trying to prevent as many, in our view, bad things from happening, now we have the opportunity to actually get our ideas and the progressive vision of the Constitution and of laws and policies into practice." End of quote. Mr. Liu holds a view of the Constitution that can only be described as an activist judicial philosophy. The centerpiece of his judicial philosophy, a theory that he describes as constitutional fidelity, sounds nice until you learn what it actually means. What he means by fidelity is, quote, "The Constitution should be interpreted in ways that adapt its principles and its text to the challenges and conditions of our society in every single generation." Continuing, he states, "On this approach, the Constitution is understood to grow and evolve over time as the conditions, needs, and values of our society changes." That's not a far cry from the unwritten Constitution of the Great Britain, where the supremacy of Parliament makes a determination from time to time what the policies are, as opposed in this country where the natural law or the laws that are the rights that we have given to us by our Creator, not by government, are the basis of our law. When I questioned the nominee at his hearing regarding his position, he stated that his book respects the notion that the text of the Constitution and the principles that it expresses are totally fixed and enduring. I must admit some confusion with this contradiction. Either the text and the principles are fixed and enduring, or they're adaptable, something that grows and evolves, like it happens with the Constitution of Great Britain. Mr. Liu is apparently comfortable with this contradiction. I'm not. It's a pattern that I find throughout his testimony. I'm concerned about his appreciation of the proper role of a judge in our system of checks and balances. His philosophy leads to an inevitable expansion of the power of the judiciary. For example, according to Mr. Liu, courts should play a role in creating and expanding constitutional welfare rights. He argues that once a legislative body creates a welfare program, it is the proper role of the courts to grasp the meaning and the purpose for that welfare benefit. He states that the courts can recognize welfare rights by, quote, invalidating statutory eligibility requirements or strengthening procedural protections against the withdrawal of benefits. Forthrightly, an attack on the legislative branch of government of its power to make statute and law, whereas the courts are supposed to be interpreting, not making law. The nominee also seems to favor a social needs-based view of living constitutionalism. His scholarly work argues that judicial decisions-making should be shaped by contemporary social needs and norms, rather than the certainty of the Constitution. Notably, he has said that, quote, "The problem for our courts is to determine at the moment of decision whether our collective values on a given issue have converged to a degree that they can be persuasively crystallized and credibly observed into legal doctrine," end of quote. Just as if what the Constitution writers in 1787, what they thought ought to be the basic law of this land, means nothing today. So, as you know, I think that this is very troublesome. Our constitutional framework puts the legislative function in the Congress, not the courts. It is a legislative function through the political process, where the people rule, that determine when a particular value is to become part of our law. This is not the duty of judges. The judiciary is limited to deciding cases and controversy, not establishing public policy. I would note further that this view of constitutional interpretation does not rely on the acts of the legislative or on the precedents established by higher courts. Rather, it is based on a concept of what he prefers to call, quote-unquote, evolving norms. Furthermore, as he testified before the committee, it is those evolving norms to which inform the Supreme Court's elaboration of constitutional doctrine. Mr. Liu tried to sound like a mainstream jurist when he stated the duty of a circuit judge was to faithfully follow the Supreme Court's instructions on matter of constitutional interpretation. Now, who's going to argue with that? But again, that sounds nice, doesn't it? But what does it mean? If we accept his premise that the Supreme Court's instructions are based upon evolving norms, it follows that such evolving norms will shape the circuit court's decision as well. This activist theory leads to a judicial system substituting the whims of individual judges over the text and the original meaning of the U.S. Constitution. This is not the duty of any circuit judge. Mr. Liu's legal views and judicial philosophy are clearly out of the mainstream. Just a small example illustrates this point. I questioned 4 of President Obama's district judge nominees who followed Mr. Liu on the day of his hearing. I asked each of them concerning a specific point about Mr. Liu's philosophy. Each and every one of them flatly rejected Mr. Liu's position. This included his views on judges' collective values when interpreting the Constitution, on using foreign law when interpreting our Constitution, and on interpreting the Constitution in ways that adopts its principles and its text, and on considering, quote-unquote, public values and social understanding when interpreting the Constitution. Based on his out-of-the-mainstream views, it is a surprise that his nomination is opposed. It's no surprise that his nomination is opposed by so many. Included in that opposition are 42 district attorneys serving the state of California. They are concerned, among other things, about his view on criminal law, capital punishment, and the role of the federal courts in second-guessing state decisions. My third area of concern is that this nominee has made a number of critical statements which indicate a lack of judicial temperament. He has been very openly critical of the current Supreme Court. In one article, he said that the holding in Bush versus Gore was, quote, unquote, utterly lacking in any legal principle. He has claimed that the current court as a whole is unprincipled, saying that, quote, if you look across the entire run of cases, you see a fairly consistent pattern where the respect for precedent goes by the wayside when it gets in the way of a result, end of quote. Mr. Liu was highly critical of the nomination of Justice Roberts. He published an article on Bloomberg.com entitled, quote, Roberts would swing the Supreme Court to the right, end of quote. In that article, he acknowledged that Roberts was qualified, saying, quote, there's no doubt Roberts has a brilliant legal mind, but a Supreme Court nominee must be evaluated on more than legal intellect, end of quote. He then voiced concerns with, quote, with remarkable consistency throughout his career, Roberts had applied his legal talent to further the causes of the far right, end of quote. He also spoke very disparagingly of Judge Roberts' conservative beliefs. Quote, before becoming a judge, he belonged to the Republican National Lawyers Association and the National Legal Center for Public Interest, whose mission is to promote, among other things, free enterprise, private property values, and limited government. These are a code word for an ideological agenda hostile to environment, workplace, and consumer protection, end of quote. Now let's think about what he just said there about Judge Roberts, now Chief Justice Roberts. Private ownership of property, limited government, free enterprise, code words for an ideological agenda hostile to the environment, workplace, and consumer protection? Does he think we're the communists run China, that the government runs everything, that is a better place when they put online every week a coal-fired plant to pollute the air, put more carbon dioxide into the air than we do in the United States, and where children are dying because food is poisoned and consumers aren't protected, and every miner in the China coal mines is in jeopardy of losing their lives? That's how out of place this guy is when he talks about free enterprise, private ownership of property, and limited government being something somehow bad. But if you get government more involved like they do in China, it's somehow a better place. This nominee has been very publicly critical also of another justice, Justice Alito in particular. He believes it is a valid criticism of Justice Alito to say that, quote, he approaches law in a formalistic, mechanical way abstracted from human experience, end of quote. And we are all familiar with Mr. Liu's scathing attack on Justice Alito's confirmation hearing. When asked about his testimony, Mr. Liu admitted the language was unduly harsh, provocative, unnecessary, and was a case of poor judgment. Now, that's one statement of Mr. Liu's with which I can agree.